Hey guys, welcome back, Cult of Film. Today I want to talk about a movie I watched actually a couple of months ago. It's still streaming on Prime if you have an Amazon Prime membership. It's I've revisited this movie like 3 times now in 2 months. It's a film that was always played on local TV in Chicago on WFLD Fox 32. That along with Halloween, Taking of Pelham 123, even Taxi Driver. Hard to believe they played Taxi Driver on local TV in the 80s, but they did. And those of you that follow the channel and watch the channel, I'm a huge fan of very gritty, uh, tactile 70s cinema, 70s like 70s cinema in general, but this is a lot of 70s New York cinema. So if you like The French Connection, if you like The Taking of Pelham 123, you might like The Warriors from 1979, based on Sol Yurick's 1965 novel of the same name. The film centers around a fictitious New York City street gang who must travel 30 miles from the north end of the Bronx to get to their home on Coney Island in South Brooklyn. After they're framed for the murder of a respected gang leader, they're basically pursued by every gang in New York City, and it's kind of this mad dash escape to get from the Bronx to Brooklyn to safety. And this movie is so beautifully shot. It is a it's it's shot in a New York that does not exist anymore. Those of you that don't know, in the 70s and I believe through the early 80s, New York City was broke. South Bronx looked like downtown Fallujah after the Iraq War. I mean, it looked literally like a war zone. Uh, there's lots of reasons for that I won't get into, and that becomes sort of like a sociological, political, economic treatise. But I really love this era of film, particularly old New York, and old New York to me being like 60s, 70s, and even like early 80s New York. There was a grit and a realism couched with beautiful cinematography that so artfully framed this gritty realism of New York City at the time. And in The Warriors, which was directed by Walter Hill, I believe he was an exploitation director. And that's another thing we love on this channel is exploitation films. At some point, we're going to go down the rabbit hole on that stuff. But the screenplay was co-written by Walter Hill and David Shaber, directed by Hill. The three sort of main characters are you have Michael Beck, who plays sort of the lead warrior. I'm blanking on his name at the moment. Then we have a very young James Remar. I've known James Remar as an actor my entire life, but I've always known him as an older man with like salt and pepper to gray hair and a mustache. And he shows up in this movie at like 20 years old with like that sort of like late 70s, like beautiful hair and skin. He's got dude's like ripped, the epitome of sort of like late 70s sort of New York tough guy sensuality. And then Deborah Van Valkenburg, who I'm sure none of you under 50 probably know who she is. She was one of the daughters in a sitcom called Too Close for Comfort, which was Ted Knight. He was a comedic actor. He died in the 80s. I know none of you know. But it was kind of cool to see her show up. And it's basically about this gang, the Warriors, and them. It's just kind of a fight for survival, getting from the Bronx to Brooklyn, because after again they were framed for this murder, this respected gang leader that was the only one in the city who apparently could pull all the gangs together into one big meeting place with nobody bringing weapons. So this guy had a lot of sway. He's then assassinated. The Warriors are framed, and like I said before, it's a mad dash for them to get to the Bronx. And what's really cool and beautiful about this film is the entire thing is filmed at night, the entire movie, which is, it's hard to do because you really need to get lighting right. Like as someone who's been studying filmmaking now for about 4 or 5 years, night shoots are complicated, and they're also more expensive. Maybe it wasn't as expensive in the late 70s when this movie came out, or what's this? 79. But it introduces a whole bunch of other difficulties because of it being dark out. But the beautiful thing about this movie is because The Warriors was shot at night in late 70s New York, it just makes all of the subways and subway stops and streets and overpasses so much more gritty and real and ominous. And so you have these fellas and this one gal just making their way through, and sometimes meeting friends, sometimes meeting foes. The fights are pretty believable. I was kind of expecting this movie to be a little cheesy, frankly, because there are some gangs like the Orphans and the Furies. The Furies sort of wear Kiss style makeup, that old rock band Kiss, along with wearing baseball uniforms, and they walk around with baseball bats, which that's a formidable weapon, especially if there's more of them than there are of you. The Orphans kind of dress like orphan kids, or at least what they thought orphan kids looked like in the late 70s. But for as seemingly cheesy as that sounds on the surface, it works, because all of these gangs and all these gang members are they're pretty vicious. Like, they don't idealize it at all, and the fights feel real. The fights feel there's a level of there's stakes to every fight. There are characters that are lost, that are killed, sometimes in really shocking ways. So there are stakes there. It's not just it. In so many ways, this film could have been a exploitation film, and it does sort of ride the line of exploitation film, but it's so much more than that because it's so beautifully photographed. It's so beautifully framed. The lighting, the contrast between the night city lights and the shadows. And again, so many of these neighborhoods, none of these neighborhoods really look like that anymore. That old New York feel, when there were no security cameras, nobody had a phone, let alone a phone camera. And so you just really needed to be the type of person, if you were out on the streets past a particular hour, and this goes for my hometown too, in Chicago, depending on where you're at, you better be able to know how to handle yourself. Otherwise, not good. And yeah, so I don't want to spoil too much for you guys. This was just such a fun movie. And frankly, the reason I started watching this is I'm a big fan of the Arrow Video podcast. If you guys haven't checked it out and you're a cinephile, you're a film head, follow them on Spotify, the Arrow Video podcast. They also have a streaming service, Arrow Video, where they stream a lot of it's mostly cult films. It's like Italian horror, low budget American horror and science fiction, all of the I'm trying to remember the old kung fu movies from back in the day, all of that stuff that really influenced people like Tarantino. There's a lot of Jean Rollin. He's the French sort of lesbian vampire director. His stuff is beautiful and fun, all there on Arrow Video. Well, the fellas at Arrow Video Podcast started talking about The Warriors, and I realized this was a film that I've heard about my whole life. It aired, again, on local TV in Chicago when I was a kid. It's always popped up, and I always kind of dismissed it and like, oh, it looks cheesy. Who are these guys dressed up like clowns, and these guys like in their leather vests? It just didn't, coming up, it just didn't seem like it was a serious movie. And I'm glad that I finally gave it a shot and watched it, because it's just a fun movie. It doesn't have any sort of heavy message or grand narrative. It's just it's just a good, fun watch. Some of the acting is a little just okay. Some of it's really good. It does feel more real, I guess, because some of these actors aren't actors, and yet some of the other characters are clearly folks that are, were actors, stage actors. They're in New York, off Broadway at the time that this movie was made. Again, Deborah Van Valkenburg, James Remar, Michael Beck, Marcelino Sanchez, who I guess passed away in the 80s. He's just a cute character. There's even pop-ups, cameos by Mercedes Ruehl, and there was one other actor who went on to do more stuff, and I'm blanking. But Mercedes Ruehl, a young Mercedes Ruehl, shows up in this. Those of you who even know who that is. The Warriors is just a fun movie that you can just put on. It's a popcorn movie, something just like a Saturday, Sunday afternoon that you don't have to feel too serious about, but let it take you with its photography, with its cinematography. Don't judge it. I really just sort of let all of my critical faculty go when I watch this movie because, again, the guys at Arrow really felt strongly about it. It's held in such high regard, not just as a cult film, but it's a really nice, it's just a beautiful time capsule, again, of that era of New York film or New York set film. So, yeah, The Warriors, 1979, currently, as of this moment, streaming for free if you have your Prime account. So, highly, highly recommended, guys. And yeah, again, thanks for watching. If you like this episode, if you are one of the 30 or 40 people who keep coming back, please subscribe, please like, please comment below what you thought of the film, if there's anything maybe in this genre or anything like this, or anything, any movie in general that you think we should review on the channel, and we'll take a look at it. But thanks for joining me now, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks, guys.